Lately, photos like these have been popping up online. They're images of strange structures in China's Gobi Desert. Photos that reveal secret locations, some of which have been hidden for decades. Of course, this has sparked theories about aliens and interdimensional portals. Of course, there's an explanation behind all this, and in this case, it might even be better than the arrival of aliens. While investigating, we stumbled upon a city that remained hidden for decades and didn't appear on any map. We also discovered the existence of what appears to be the Chinese equivalent of the US's Area 50, both located in the same desert. All of this is certainly curious, but there's one thing that's particularly surprising. How do you keep all of this hidden for so long? I mean, or satellite, or could the people themselves let the cat out of the bag? We're talking about one of these hidden places being an entire city with over 100,000 inhabitants, and these aren't isolated cases. Something new is discovered every so often. So get comfortable, because we're gonna start shedding some light on all. This black and white photo you see here looks pretty old, but if we zoom in on the sign, we can see it's from 2004. Specifically, it's from the Chinese New Year celebration. It's from a city called 404. Yes, it's named the same as the 404 error, the not found one. But it's actually not some kind of Chinese meta-humor referencing how they've kept the city hidden all these years. It's just a coincidence. 404 is the identification code used by the former nuclear plant there. In 1958, this plant became part of a government-led nuclear industrial project during the Cold War. The city doesn't appear on maps. It's secret. There have only been hints of its existence online since 2017. The idea behind the city was to bring together top minds from all disciplines in a single place and create a sort of Eden for manufacturing the most sensitive components, the atomic bomb. A former resident described it this way: the first generation of 404 belonged to the country's brightest elites. There were locksmiths who could replicate a key at a glance, industrial operators who knew how to fix machines just by listening to them. The country's best engineers were there. They had rounded up the greatest talents. There were the most Chuasic chefs of all, the most renowned master pastry chefs, and their slogan was as follows: dedicate your youth, dedicate your life, and dedicate it to your descendants. Their mission was to carry out Project 596, which sought to arm China with the atomic bomb. At that time, the final adjustments to nuclear weapons required precision work that only humans themselves could perform. And as you can imagine, not just any humans. For some components, the margin of error could not exceed 1/8 the width of a human hair. They needed the best. The residents were not allowed to speak of any of this. They required internal passports and could not leave once they entered. Any mention of their activities was also strictly confidential. However, even though the city was in the middle of nowhere and once inside you couldn't leave, it had recreational facilities. It had its own zoo, movie theater, lollipop factory, and even its own ice cream truck. The site continued to develop, gaining the capacity to produce uranium and weapons until, in 1964, it achieved its goal. Finally, China's military nuclear program had obtained enough highly enriched uranium. The result was this bomb. When China tested the atomic bomb, it established itself as the fifth world power to acquire nuclear weapons. After the explosion, the Chinese army paraded horses wearing masks to protect them from the mushroom cloud. The idea was to imply that they were prepared to face even radiation. Some of them, as seen in the photo, looked very menacing, with a saber raised high, which certainly seems like a good strategy for facing someone with nuclear bombs. After that test, the city went from being a factory to becoming a nuclear waste dump. Some of its residents specialized in nuclear waste management, and those who took on that task were told they were going to work in the pit. There were several rules at work. They'll sound familiar if you've seen the Chernobyl series. For starters, they couldn't work for more than half an hour, so the radiation wouldn't be fatal. And people who came into contact with radioactive material were tracked down, and everything they touched disposed of. They did this because, upon exposure to a radioactive site, workers might carry dust on their bodies or have inhaled radioactive particles, turning them into a dangerous source. Also, it was likely something they did to prevent rumors from spreading that someone had died from radiation. According to accounts, There were stories of people losing their hair overnight or of furniture being confiscated because it belonged to someone who had been irradiated. In any case, the city grew to 100,000 residents by the late 1990s, but that's also when decline began. Due to the desert terrain and the nuclear bunkers that had been built beneath the buildings, the city lost stability and began to sink. People were relocated to Jiayuguan in 2006, and the place was abandoned. That is the story of City 404, but there is an even greater mystery that has recently emerged, which people have begun to call China's Area 51. The bomb test and the Great Horse Hunt took place in the same desert, the Gobi Desert. It's a region of China covering 1.3 million square kilometers, making it the sixth largest desert in the world. This isn't just a fun fact. It means it has a vast area, which is probably why they chose it for the bomb test. It was the site where the first dinosaur egg fossils were found and served as a key stop on the Silk Road. Setting aside the mini geography lesson, the photos I showed you at the beginning are from a part of that desert called Lop Nur. It seems that strange things have been happening in that area for quite some time now. For example, Lop Nur was an ancient lake that sustained ancient kingdoms like that of Lulan, a city known only through stories for centuries and, much like 404, was lost until someone rediscovered it in 1900. Lop Nur was a lake that shifted location over time and is known as the Wandering Lake. That said, it did so in 500-year cycles, but recently the lake disappeared as it began to dry up due to human intervention. Now it is a salt basin. The area also borders the Taklamakan Desert, which is also called the Sea of Death, because of its reputation for swallowing up entire travelers and making them vanish. Some refer to it with the cliché from adventure movies: if you go in, you don't come out. And as I mentioned, it's also the place where some of these strange photos have emerged. What you see there is a military compound used, among other things, to conduct top-secret technology tests. Furthermore, it's a restricted area off-limits to foreigners and to the vast majority of the country's residents as well. The triangle is actually an ultra-high-strength concrete runway that stretches nearly 5 kilometers. It's built to withstand precision bombs and designed to handle landings in any wind condition, which is why it's shaped like a triangle. But as you can see, for now only one of the areas is paved, although some headlines already classify it as China's Area 51, which isn't so different from the American one. Just like the American Area 51, this place cannot be flown over, and it houses some of the country's most advanced aircraft. It is believed that the runways are so large because they have been used to test an experimental fighter model capable of flying in both the atmosphere and space, in other words, convertible craft to rocket. And when this model lands, it reaches hypersonic speeds and needs plenty of space to slow down. Other models have been spotted on the runways, such as the Chengdu J-36 and the Shenyang J-50. The J-36 specializes in stealth and is the second largest fighter jet ever to fly. This insightful report and analysis by an aviation expert states that the fighter has a third engine, a rare feature, and that, thanks to this, it can sustain supersonic speeds for longer periods. It can reach Mach 2, which is about 2,450 kilometers per hour. The Shenyang J-50 appears to be more advanced than the J-36, but differs in weight. The pair, it seems, is designed to operate together. The key point here is that the technology they use appears to be more advanced than that used by the fighter jets being tested at Area 51 in the United States. That's why the article, it's further along. The United States also has a contender, the Engaged F-47. It's said that it could also reach Mach 2, but it's unclear whether it exists yet or not. The talk surrounding it is speculative, and it appears it is scheduled to be released between 2026 and 2029. In addition to these fighter jet tests, there are other structures in the desert. People are constantly discussing new sightings on Google Earth and making discoveries. Some are sites used for testing nuclear weapons. Others are fields where construction is underway for silos to store missiles. While researching these structures, we found it fascinating just how immense they are, because we're not talking about a simple hole. Some silos reach 50 meters underground, which is about 15 stories deep. They require constant maintenance by an entire team, and there are also cases where they are interconnected within a missile silo complex. In China, though not in this desert, there is a network of tunnels used to store and transport missiles that stretches about 5,000 kilometers and is called the Underground Wall of China. Other photos like this one show patterns drawn to aid with satellite position. Some satellites have low-resolution cameras and need this kind of assistance to orient themselves in. And now let's talk about the question, probably been on your mind for quite a while. How does China manage to hide these places for years or even decades, as in the case of the city? I mean, sure, they aren't that hidden if we already know they exist. But the fact is that for many years they've managed to keep it a secret. And in fact, we don't know if there are other cities like that or other places, but these sudden discoveries have raised doubts. What other things might they have hidden out there? How do they manage to hide all this from the rest of the world? With Lop Nur, the Gobi Desert, and the Taklamakan, easy to see. These are areas with very limited access, or where entry is outright prohibited. This is already a first step toward preventing these secrets from coming to light. That's not the only thing they do. It's one thing to prevent the general public from observing and analyzing what's happening, but it's also important to protect against other countries' intelligence services, and China's methods are, to say the least, original. Let's divide the process of hiding these structures into direct and indirect concealment. Direct concealment is the obvious approach. It involves physical measures making the site invisible, ensuring it is camouflaged. For example, one way to avoid satellite scrutiny is through domes, which are these cupolas that function like a kind of greenhouse. Under the domes, no one knows what is being built. In fact, the domes are not only like a greenhouse but also function as one, preventing the concrete from cracking due to low temperatures during the winter. They can also be designed to blend in with the desert. The problem is that this technique alone usually doesn't work. There are satellites that use infrared and can detect heat variations. As a countermeasure, the temperatures of the facilities can be monitored and cooled to match the surroundings. But there are other solutions, such as special pigments that can fool infrared sensors. But even if all of this is solved, another difficulty arises: radar. Radars emit electromagnetic waves. These waves bounce off objects, and their echoes are measured upon return to gather information about the objects present. Radar can detect facilities through fog or sand, regardless of temperature or color. A radar from space could even locate a shoebox. To prevent this, Chinese scientists claim to have developed an invisibility cloak capable of reflecting radar waves so that it appears as if nothing is there. In other words, they scatter the waves emitted by the radar, and the waves either never return to their source or return as unreadable signals, making it very difficult or impossible to know what is hidden there. They also use anti-GPS technologies to navigate using their own geolocation system and prevent external satellites from interfering or obtaining location data. GPS is the US geolocation system and is used quite frequently because it is freely accessible and anyone with a suitable receiver can access it. Europe also has its own system called Galileo, and China has Beidou, which is said to be even more accurate than GPS. To block GPS, they use jammers devices that emit a signal that scrambles L-band and VHF signals, frequency bands commonly used by GPS satellites and aircraft communications. What they do is create a jamming bubble where everything inside becomes nothing but static. Precise positioning becomes impossible, and they also cut off any possibility of communication. Sometimes they also load the jammers into vans and drive around the desert with them to create even more chaos. There are also places that literally become invisible. There are silos capable of hiding underground when they detect that a satellite capable of identifying them is nearby. There are satellites capable of detecting missiles or rockets by the heat signature they leave behind, thus preventing them from being located. Then there are indirect methods, such as the Chinese government restricting access to this information for foreign companies. All the maps you can find on Google, according to this restriction, must not pose any danger to China or reveal state secrets. If for any reason they contain information about these locations, they will appear blurred or have a zoom limit. Even if their existence is known, the information doesn't reach us because it's restricted. China, as many of you know, also has the most sophisticated censorship system in the world. It is known as Great Firewall of China, a control mechanism that has been in operation since early 1998. If someone were to buy a phone with a Chinese ROM installed, they would see that the built-in browser flags YouTube or Google apps as dangerous and harmful content. In any case, this system can be circumvented fairly easily with a VPN, though ideally one should use Tor. It's also not uncommon for residents to use apps like YouTube or Instagram, though they are still less common. Even with all these protocols and tools in place, we know there are ways to bypass them. We cannot say to what extent information from these secret locations has been leaked, whether it was the result of a slip-up or something deliberate. What is clear is that these secrets are quite intriguing.